Welcome to my home, where I'm going to be videoing a new series all about domestic authenticity. I hope to share many ideas to inform and inspire you to live a full life, from cooking and baking to gardening and entertaining. Since the early 1900s, the concept of home economics has inspired a holistic approach to how we live and entertain in our homes. I encourage you to find your own vision of creativity within yours so that you can feel pride in the connection that you create with it. Join me as we explore life at home with Joseph. Hey everybody, today we're going to be making some of my favorite doughs for the holidays. I picked 3 of my recipes here that I'm going to share with you guys, and thank you for registering. As you know, you guys are going to be getting all 3 recipes via email for joining today, and I've picked these doughs specifically because they are very easy to be frozen. I make these all the time. I keep them in my freezer so that when I'm entertaining or even during the holidays, I don't have to go through that step because I'm going to be making so much other food. It really makes life a lot easier just to be able to pull it out of the freezer, let it thaw, and then work with it. My very first dough that I'm going to share with you is a basic pie tart dough. A pâté brisé is a very classical French pastry. So it's very important when you're working with pastry dough to work with very cold ingredients. So we're going to start out with some butter that I've prepared, already chilled in the refrigerator. And when I'm making my pastry doughs, I usually make 3 or 4 at a time. And like I said, I like to freeze them. And it allows me to get all of the ingredients out at once, mise en place them all in front of me so that my tools are by my task. And when I'm portioning out the butter, I use these great labels that are found at like an office supply store, and you can write on them with a Sharpie, and you can label your ingredients for what recipe you're actually working with. So these are very handy to use when you're baking. First, we're going to start with 3 3/4 cups of pre-sifted flour. When you're scooping your flour into your cup, you don't want to pack it in. You want to just loosely get it in there. Give it a few taps. And I like to scrape mine off to make it nice and level with an offset spatula. 1 1/2 teaspoons of salt. When I'm baking, I prefer to use sea salt, a very fine sea salt. I think it imparts a much better flavor than just a regular table salt. 1 tablespoon of sugar. It also calls for 1/2 cup of water with some lemon juice. I have my water here in a water bath to keep it nice and cold. Again, you want to work with very cold ingredients. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sift our flour together with all of the ingredients. And using my cold butter, I'm going to pour all of the butter right into the flour. And we're going to break the flour into the butter. And we're going to work very quickly. You don't want the butter to warm up too much while you're making this. And the first step when I'm breaking up the butter with the flour, I don't worry about breaking it into small pieces just yet. I want to get the butter mashed in with the flour, and then I can work it a little bit better with my fingers once that's done. Okay, so now that I've got my dough just to the texture that I want it to be, you want it to be sort of a cornmeal-y type of a texture so that the butter is worked into the flour, but you want a lot of large pieces in here. Because what's going to happen is the butter, the larger pieces of the butter, it's going to create air pockets in the flour as it bakes, which is going to give you that nice, crispy, light, flaky crust. This is a 1/2 cup of ice cold water with the juice of 1 lemon mixed into it. I'm just going to make a well in the middle of my flour mixture. I'm going to pour this in. I'm not going to quite put all of it in.
I start to lightly mix it with a spoon because I don't quite want to get the heat of my hands in there just yet. And once it starts to incorporate, I'll go in and I'll start bringing the dough together. I'm going to spread some flour on my cutting board. I'm just going to knead the dough a little bit to finish bringing it together. So I'm going to cut this in half. And this is going to make 2 pie or tart shells. And all I'm going to do is turn these into 2 small discs to get them ready to freeze. Once we've got them shaped, we're just going to wrap them with some parchment paper. And then we're going to wrap them very well in saran wrap. And then I like to put mine in a Ziploc bag. Make sure they're labeled pie dough. And then these can actually be frozen like this and pulled out probably about 3 hours before you're ready to use them. And the nice thing about freezing them is that they will be ice cold when you're ready to roll them out. So they'll be perfect to use. So the next dough we're going to do is actually a galette dough. And you can use a galette dough for any number of dishes. I think of it sort of like a pizza would be, right? A flat dough, and then you've got the toppings on top and the dough comes over on the side. Today's dough that I'm sharing is a cornmeal galette dough. This is ingredients for a double recipe, which is going to be 2 cups of flour, a half of a cup of cornmeal, 2 teaspoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, buttermilk, along with ice water, and cold butter. So we're going to get our cold butter out of the refrigerator. And I am going to, again, get all my butter in there, and I'm going to work my butter into the flour before I add any of the liquid. And as we're bringing this dough together, a galette dough is going to be a little bit wetter of a dough than a pie dough. It's got a little bit more liquid to it. The more you work with dough, the more you can actually feel the texture of it to know when it's been worked properly and when it's been overworked. When a dough starts to feel very gelatinous, like it's springing back in your fingers, you know you're starting to overwork it too much. So the best practice is just to stop, throw this in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes, let the gluten and the flour relax, and then come back and work with it for the rest of the way that you need to. Okay. So we're going to do the same thing with this dough. We are going to wrap it in the discs in our parchment paper. Each disc will then be sealed in saran wrap. And then for further protection, I usually put them in a Ziploc bag. And make sure you label your dough so you know what you're doing. So the third and final recipe that we're going to be doing today is a quiche dough. And this is a recipe that I got from a friend of mine from Brooklyn, New York, my friend Helen. She had a wonderful shop there and made the most amazing quiches. And I was lucky enough that she taught me her recipes for this. So I'm going to be sharing this recipe with you, and probably in a subsequent web series, we're actually going to do a quiche for you. And if I can, maybe I can get Helen to do a guest appearance with us. So our dough is coming together. Now this dough was 2 cups of flour, 3 tablespoons of sugar, a half a teaspoon of salt, 2 lemons for zesting, 3/4 of a cup of unsalted chilled butter, 3 hard-cooked egg yolks, and the final addition as the liquid is going to be 2 egg whites. And it's really the egg whites in this recipe, along with the hard-cooked egg yolks that are in this, that are really going to give it a nice, rich, silky texture to it. And we're just going to knead it together till it all comes together as one nice solid dough. Ready? Okay. So if I'm making any of these doughs fresh to be used the day that I'm making them, you really want to give them a good long rest in the refrigerator for the gluten and the flour to really relax. Otherwise, when you're rolling it out, your dough is going to start shrinking on you. It's not going to fit in the pan. So I usually give my doughs a good 2 to 3 hours in the refrigerator if I'm going to use it that day. So I'll make the dough in the morning and finish the dish later on that day. So now that we've completed all of our doughs, my mother has asked if she can make an apple pie with one of them. Say hello to the camera.
Hi.
So I have my trusted assistant over there, remember, who I taught everything I know, peeling apples for an apple pie. And I'm going to show you how we roll out one of the doughs and actually put it into a pie dish. So we're going to lightly flour it, lightly flour the top. And you also want to give your rolling pin a good amount of flour. When you are rolling a pastry dough, you always want to start from the middle of the dough and roll out in either direction. You never want to go back and forth like this. So you want to roll it out from the middle out. Give it a quarter turn and do the same thing. And at this point, if I see that the edges are getting crinkly like this around here, I will just lightly push these ends in with my fingers, just so that my finished dough will have a nice clean edge around it. It also gives me an opportunity to feel what parts of my dough are thinner than the other. And you probably noticed that my dough was a little bit oval when I first started. If it is, you're just going to work it an extra roll in the same direction to balance it out. And you can see by sticking with doing from the middle out, you get a nice even circle with your dough. So you can see here how this is inching in. So we're going to straighten that out. I'm literally just pushing the dough in and crimping it with my fingers. And you don't want to handle the dough for too long, or else it's going to warm up too much. And without a lot of pressure, I'm going to finish the shape of my dough. So rather than overhandling the dough because you don't want it to tear, you just want to lightly fold it over. It's nice and floured, so it's not going to be sticky. And put your pie plate right next to your dough. So move the dish to the dough, don't move the dough to the dish. And then gently pick it up at the part where it's folded so that it's on the thicker side and not the thinner side of the crust. And then just very carefully and gently unfold your dough. And I'm just going to lightly roll it almost till it's inside the dish. So not on the rim, but in front of the rim on the inside. I've got the dough nicely folded over under into itself, so it makes a nice little crust. There's different ways of doing this. The way I like to do it is I like to hold the dough with my first finger and my thumb and pinch in front of my finger and keep moving down the line. Don't worry about it not being perfect on the outside. We're going to fix that as soon as it's all done. It's always best to put a pie dough in the oven when it's nice and chilled and the butter's cold. It creates a lot of steam in the dough to give it a nice flaky texture. Okay, there's a beautifully crimped pie dough. Try one, make a couple batches of it, freeze it, and see really for yourself how easy it is when you do prepare like that, how much easier life is when it comes time to preparing for the holidays or entertaining, that half of your work is already done for you. Thanks so much for joining us.